When we think about what it means to be wealthy, most people, myself included, immediately think of numbers, a bigger salary, a larger house, an investment portfolio that only trends upwards. But nearly 2000 years ago, an ancient philosopher challenged this idea with a single statement. You see, this statement shifts our understanding of wealth from something that needs to be accumulated to something even more intentional and refined. So stick around to the end of this video to find out what that statement is. Hello there. My name is Hidara, and welcome back to the Prudent Drift, a channel where we discuss intentional and slow living in a loud world that has been designed to keep us distracted and dissatisfied. When was the last time you checked your bank balance and felt truly at peace? Not relief because a bill cleared, not excitement about a raise, but genuine, deep contentment. Feel like, most people, myself included, for many years, that feeling was rare, maybe even non existent. And what's even more heartbreaking about this is that it's not just about people who are struggling to make ends meet. Even the wealthy, even people who should be financially stable, who earn well, also report feeling this anxiety and restlessness and dissatisfaction with money. I remember my own journey early on in my career, as I would always point out on this channel. Um, I had this magic number in my head, and I was like, oh, maybe if I reach this amount, I'm going to be content, I'm going to be happy, life could not be any better. And I would get that amount, or maybe I would get a promotion and I'm paid that amount, and suddenly the goalpost moves. It's like, okay, that amount is not meeting the needs I thought it would, or it's not giving me that level of satisfaction. I mean, it gives you that initial excitement, but after that, there is a new goalpost and you just want more. It's like chasing a horizon, and no matter how far I traveled, it always seemed just as far away. Admittedly, my life circumstances changed with age, which could have contributed to me needing more money or requiring more financial stability. But nonetheless, it still revealed that when it comes to wealth accumulation, it's very easy to fall for the moving goalpost. Which brings us to part one, the great deception. Wealth does not equal stability. We've been conditioned to believe that accumulation is the answer to life's uncertainties. Save more, earn more, invest more, and eventually you'll reach this mythical place called financial security, where anxiety disappears and peace reigns. I wish. Because here's what research actually shows, and this is where it gets interesting. Princeton economist Angus Deaton and psychologist Daniel Kahneman conducted a famous 2010 research that analyzed over 450,000 responses on income and life satisfaction. They found that emotional well being increases with income up to about $75,000 annually, but after that, the curve flattens dramatically. More recent studies suggest that number might be closer to $95,000 to $105,000 in today's dollars. But the principle remains the same. Beyond meeting your basic needs and a reasonable buffer, additional wealth doesn't translate into additional peace of mind. In fact, researchers at Harvard Business School found something fascinating in their 2018 study on time poverty. They discovered that wealthier individuals often report feeling more time stressed than their lower income counterparts, despite having more resources to outsource tasks. But here's the real kicker, and this is where it gets personal for all of us. The same Harvard study found that people who prioritized time over money were consistently happier, regardless of their income level. The wealthy people who understood this were happier than the wealthy people who didn't. And the modest income people who understood this were happier than the modest income people who were still chasing the more money equals more security myth. You see, the ancient philosopher Seneca, who was actually quite rich himself, understood this paradox perfectly. And this is why nearly 2000 years ago, he wrote that it is not the man who has too little, but the man who saves more who is poor. Think about that for a moment, because poverty, according to one of history's greatest thinkers, isn't about your bank balance. It's about your relationship with enough. And this brings us to part two, psychology of never enough. You're probably wondering, so if we understand that, you know, our understanding of wealth is not about the amount in your bank account, then why do we get trapped in this cycle? Why does our brain keep moving these goalposts? And it all comes down to something psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. Basically, we adapt to circumstances remarkably quick. So that promotion you must have worked hard for, and maybe you received it, the rush lasts a few weeks, a few months, and maybe a year if you're lucky. But then it becomes your new normal very quickly. And sometimes this is where lifestyle inflation sets in. The dopamine hits, fades, and you're back looking for the next big thing. But there's something even more insidious happening here. And this is where I want to get really honest with you about the emotional cost of this misunderstanding. When we treat money as our primary source of security, we unconsciously hand over control of our peace of mind to forces completely outside of our control. The stock market, the economy, our employers' whims, industry trends, global events. Dr. Kim Kessler, a psychologist at Knox College, has spent decades studying the relationship between materialism and well being. And his research, which he compiled across multiple studies, shows consistently that the people who prioritize material wealth as a primary life goal report higher levels of anxiety and depression, lower levels of life satisfaction, and even more troubled relationships. And you see, this is what is interesting about Kesse's life work, because it's not just that materialistic people are unhappy or the rich also cry or whatever terminology you want to use. It's the fact that the pursuit of wealth as security actually undermines the very things that would make us have a secure life, which are strong relationships, a sense of purpose, and internal resilience. And you see, I think about this in my own life because the periods when I was focused on accumulating money were also the periods when I felt the most isolated. You basically have less time to spend with your loved ones. You're not as present as you should be. And even in terms of your health, you don't have the time to listen to your body, to eat right, or even to exercise. And the scripture also speaks to this pattern too. In Matthew 6:24, we are told that no one can serve two masters at the same time. You cannot serve both God and money. And I'm not trying to say that money is evil. If you know me, you know that that's very far from how I operate. But what it means is that when you make money a priority, it requires your total allegiance. It consumes our thoughts, it drives our emotions, and ultimately it controls us. And I think this is why most times when you think of the biggest CEOs or the biggest impact makers in the world, the richest men and women, a lot of times underneath all that impact and achievement are people who have compromised their values, people who have done things they maybe their past selves, maybe their present selves do not think about it, but their past selves may not have been proud of, especially those who prioritize money. Now, if you stumble upon money while you were, with an upright heart, without compromising your values, that's a whole different ball game. But so let's talk about, the real cost of what this misunderstanding is to us, because the price that goes far beyond, dollars, naira, cents, or whatever it is, whatever currency you're dealing in. For starters, it's costing us our relationships. A 2019 study from the University of Georgia found that financial stress is one of the top predictors of relationship conflict and divorce. But here's the nuance that matters. It wasn't actually financial hardship that predicted relationship problems. It was financial anxiety and money focused arguments. Basically, it's not being broke that destroys relationships. It's being consumed by money worries, regardless of your actual financial situation. Second, it's costing us our health. The American Psychology Association's annual stress survey consistently shows that money and work are the top sources of stress for Americans. And honestly, as much as this study is focused on Americans, I feel like it applies to people all over the world, because we know that chronic stress is linked to everything from heart disease to depression to compromised immune function. But perhaps most tragically, it's costing us our sense of purpose. When wealth accumulation becomes a primary goal, everything else becomes secondary. Our passions, our values, our desires to contribute something meaningful to the world, all of it gets pushed aside in service of, the almighty dollar. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who understood poverty intimately because this time around he was born a slave, wrote something that cuts right to the heart of this. Wealth consists in not having great possessions, but in having few ones. And if you think about it, this is not about romanticizing poverty or suggesting that we should all live in, like, monk life austerity. It's about understanding that security comes from a different source entirely. So now let's redefine wealth. I mean, if you think about it, now that we've heard all this research and, you know, seen all these quotes from great minds, what then is real wealth? What does genuine financial security actually look like? If you were to ask me, I would propose, some sort of radical redefinition. And I would say true wealth is sufficiency plus contentment multiplied by autonomy. Let me explain. Sufficiency means having enough to meet your actual needs. Not everyone's, not every fear based what if scenario, but your real needs: food, shelter, healthcare, some recreation, and a reasonable emergency fund. I mean, if you look at MIT's living wage calculator as well as Ontario's living wage calculator, it shows that, you know, what the amount required to have a good life varies according to location. But at the end of the day, it is far less than what people actually think. And if we have this understanding, contentment should come easy, because contentment is the ability to find genuine satisfaction with sufficiency. This is not settling or giving up on growth or being less ambitious. It's recognizing abundance in what you already have. The moral here, once again, is not to be less ambitious, because financial stability is essential to a wholly good life. However, we must also never lose sight of the other pillars of good life, which are health, relationship, and purpose. You see, the data backs this up, because a 2020 study from University of British Columbia found that people who spent money in ways that aligned with their personal values reported significantly higher life satisfaction than those who, spent impulsively or to impress others, regardless of their total spending amount. So it doesn't matter the amount you spend. What matters is how is this money aligning with your value system rather. And even the scripture, talks about this in First Timothy 6:6, where it says, "Godliness with contentment is great gain." This is not just a religious platitude, it's pointing to a fundamental truth about human flourishing. When we combine moral purpose with contentment, we access a form of wealth that can't be taxed, stolen, or lost in a market crash. Okay, enough with the research and scriptures. Now let's focus on the path forward. So, how do we actually rewire our relationship with money? How do we break free from this cultural programming about on how to build and how to build genuine wealth, right? I would say the first one is define your personal enough. I remember reading this book, The Psychology of Money, and in that book, I was able to understand why defining your enough is important. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be brutally honest with yourself. It's not about, like, what your parents expect, what society says, what people in your age group are doing, or what Instagram even suggests. It's about what you actually need to live well. And Tiffany Aliche. I don't know if if you're not following Tiffany Aliche, you should follow her on Instagram. She's really good with, money talks. And she calls this, she tells people to always audit their lives and think of what is called their noodle budget, which is like a necessity audit, right? So you list every expense within the last 3 months and think of the ones that are essential, basically the ones that if you had nothing today and no way of getting more, you would genuinely struggle without them. And those are like, that's meant to be like your, how when you're starving and you have noodles, There's no rice, no stew, no plantain, no coleslaw, just noodles, right? Now that's meant to be your noodle budget. Those essential things, identify them. These are the important, like let's say maybe health, accommodation, food, clothing, if you feel you don't have enough for clothing, right? So now those are the important things. I mean, you'll most likely be surprised at how many things are not so important. So give it these three categories: essential, importance, and, and optional. Now, so essential are the ones that are life threatening without, right? Important are the ones that add value to your life. I mean, they wouldn't, I wouldn't say they are essential, but having them in your life gives, your life a boost. It adds value. And then, we have the optionals like Netflix subscription or Prime TV subscription or paying for Amazon deliveries and whatnot. Secondly, shift from accumulation to appreciation. This is where gratitude becomes a financial strategy. If you remember Dr. Emmons' research, which showed that gratitude practices literally rewires your brain to notice abundance rather than scarcity. So I would implore that you spend at least 5 minutes every day acknowledging what you already have, not just material things, but relationships, experiences, opportunities. You can even take it deeper and practice what I call temporal gratitude, which is appreciating past investments that are still paying dividends. So let's say that education you got years ago and how it has helped you to achieve, to get to where you are today. Maybe you were able to get a job because of it, or you're able to meet certain people in that environment, or the time you invested in learning a skill that has saved you money. It could be plumbing, it could be changing your tires, or even the relationships you've built, right? These are forms of wealth that have compounded over time. Step three is invest in anti-fragile assets. Nassim Taleb coined the term anti-fragile to describe things that get stronger under stress. While financial markets crash, these investments appreciate. We have skills that can't be automated, deep relationships that provide emotional and practical support, physical and mental health, a reputation for integrity and competence, knowledge and wisdom that applies across contexts. Practice voluntary simplicity. I'm not asking you to deprive yourself. I'm talking about intention, voluntary simplicity, literally that. Try a reverse lifestyle inflation experiment. So let's say every time your income increases, instead of immediately expanding your lifestyle, sit with it for, if you remain in that lifestyle for at least maybe 3 months and channel that money towards savings, investments, topping up your emergency funds or whatsoever it is. And just before you elevate your lifestyle, ask yourself, what would this additional money be worth if I invested it in my values instead of my wants, right? And I'm saying this coming from the understanding that you've already identified your values. You already know the things are important to you. So let's say maybe you value cooking. You could join a cooking class, or you want to learn baking. You could use that money and channel it towards learning how to bake, right? So even though it's your quote unquote general lifestyle is the same, the fact that you have added something or you're spending on something that matters to you is going to bring you, greater fulfillment than if you just moved into a bigger house. Five, reframe money as a tool, not as a goal. This is the ideology I've had for a long time. Money is meant to be used as a tool and not a goal. It's not meant to just sit in our bank accounts and accumulate. It's meant to be used as a tool to help us achieve the things that are really important to us. Because you see, money is energy. It represents stored time and efforts that you can direct towards your values. So the question is not how can I make more money? What you should be asking yourself is how can I align my financial resources with what matters most to me? And this is why I love Ramit Sethi's concept of a rich life, because it focuses primarily on intentionally crafting a life you love by spending extravagantly on those things and then cutting costs in other areas. So if maybe your definition of a rich life is attending theater plays every other month, then go ahead and achieve that, right? So all you just need to do is channel your resources towards ensuring that you're able to afford at least a ticket to watch a theater play. And every other part of your life, stays at the minimal, right? So now I love this idea because it moves beyond just saving money and it encourages purposeful spending and investing. So here's my challenge to you, right? The next time you feel anxiety, pause and ask, is this about actual need or a manufactured want? Identify one thing you can do right now that aligns with your values, regardless of your financial situation. And I feel this will go a long way to help you deal with financial anxieties. If this resonated with you, I want to hear all about it. Please leave a comment, below on your definition of enough. What does true wealth look like to you in your life right now? And if you know someone who is trapped in the more money equals more security mindset, please do well to share this video with them. Sometimes all we need is by permission to, get off the hamster wheel. Lastly, remember, in a culture that profits off your dissatisfaction, contentment isn't just a personal victory, it's a quiet revolution. So until next time, drift wisely. Bye.